This is the meeting of the Mobile City Planning Commission for Thursday, June 4th, 2020. General procedures for this remote meeting are as follows. I will announce an application. The staff will give an overview, including any information regarding feedback from the applicant or other interested parties. I will then open the meeting for discussion by the commission members. After discussion, I will call for a motion, a second, and then a roll call vote. After the vote, we will move to the next item. Commission members and staff, please remember to keep your microphone on mute unless you are speaking to the meeting attendees. Roll call, myself present, Ms. Libby Latham.
Here.
Ms. Bess Rich.
Here.
Mr. Don Hembry.
Here.
Mr. Nick Omberger.
Here.
Mr. Jay Stubbs.
Here.
Ms. Jennifer Denson.
Here.
Mr. Alan Cameron.
Here.
Ms. Shirley Sessions.
Here.
Mr. John Stroke, he's not one of our people. Okay. That's Mr. Taylor Atchison.
Here.
And we have a quorum. I believe our first item is for the adoption of the agenda. Do I need a roll?
No, sir.
Okay.
You need the adoption of the agenda, but you do not need to do a roll call vote at this point unless there's a question as to who has voted for or against something.
Okay. I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. All in favor for adoption of the agenda?
Aye.
All right. Agenda opposed. Agenda is adopted. We'll begin with item number 1, our holdovers. 5536 Sermon Road West and Collins subdivision, first edition, re-subdivision of lots 10 through 12. This is recommended. They're requesting a holdover for another 60 days. So this will be on the August 6th commission agenda.
We would ask for the commission to approve the holdover because it is at the request of the applicant.
Okay.
I move we approve the request for a holdover.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded that the request for holdover be granted. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of the holdover?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question for the staff. You know, as I was looking through the report, and I apologize as I missed the last meeting, it might have been discussed there, but it looked like there was some intent for that connector to be accepted by the city, and it never got accepted. Do we know if that's still something that's in the pipeline to be done, or what's the status of that? Do we know?
I think they are still weighing their options.
Okay.
But they were also trying to get in touch with your office regarding the street and its acceptance.
Okay.
They just had not done so by this meeting.
Yeah, it's generally worrisome if they haven't followed through a process by which to get it accepted. They may not have started in their process to get it accepted, which means they may not have some of the supporting documentation that's required, you know, for us to make a recommendation to the city council for them to accept the street. So that could pose an issue for them if they didn't do the proper geotechnical testing, have the road designed, you know, right from the start.
Any further discussion? All in favor for the holdover?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposes? Item will be held over till August 6th meeting. Item number 2, the preserve at Milk House Creek. It is a zoning and it's recommended for tentative approval by the staff.
Yes,
Staff?
sir. Mr. Chairman, the applicant has asked to participate in the meeting. It's Trey Genwright for the engineer for the applicant, so I'm going to admit him now. Mr. Genwright, can you hear us? There he is. Mr. Genwright, can you hear us? Okay, you're muted.
About now?
Yes, sir, we can hear you now.
All right, great.
The chairman had just called the application when you were admitted into the meeting. If you would like to give an overview.
Yes, please. My name is Trey Genwright. I'm a project engineer with J Consulting. I represent the Radcliffe family, which owns this piece of property. They bought it back in, I believe the summary I have here says in 2017. The idea here is to do a single family neighborhood, very similar to the ones that are neighboring the area. When we had met with city staff a few months ago, it was, I guess, not necessarily discovered, but discussed that as the property currently sits, there's 3 zonings on the site. We've got a business zoning, an R2 zoning, which allows duplexes, and then a single family zoning on there. And so in an effort to clean up the map, it was requested that we'd submit a rezoning application to the city for consideration that would allow just one single use over there. So in summary, it would be a down zoning of the property from B1 R2 to be a consistent R1. The R1 in the city of Mobile allows for 7,200 square foot lots. There's a conceptual plan that's been included in your package that shows our proposed lot layout. And that would be the typical lot size there, I believe, is 9,800 square feet. So we're about 36% larger than what would be allowed otherwise in that district. The intent there is to follow the topography there. We would provide buffers on the existing wetlands that we've delineated and develop a neighborhood that would be an asset to the area. So with that being said, I'm here to answer questions, and we certainly appreciate you entertaining this request. We appreciate you allowing the city to function in this new form, this Zoom meeting. It's very helpful for us, and we just thank you for your time.
Mr. Chairman, I do have some questions, comments for him.
Any additional information from staff?
No, sir, we would just mention that this is strictly right now.
There being none, I entertain a motion for this item.
Hold on, Mr. Chairman. I do have some questions for the applicant. Sure not.
I can hear you, Nick. No, I'm not sure if Carlos can.
Yeah.
I can't hear you guys speaking.
Can you?
Carlos, can you hear me? This is Doug.
Nick, I can hear you clear.
I
Okay.
can't hear anybody speaking.
All right. Well,
Carlos is having-
let me kind of say, Trey, that general area and all those neighborhoods in there were built in a bunch of different phases over a lengthy period of time. And
I
what's
see your mouse moving, but I can't hear you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I move it. Need to unmute it.
I can hear Carlos.
I can hear Carlos, you can't hear us?
He doesn't know he can't hear.
Yeah, he didn't know he can't hear us.
He might have cut the audio feed down at the bottom.
No, his audio's on because we can hear him. He can't hear us.
All right.
Are you on
Seems to
Bluetooth?
be a problem on my end. You can hear me, but I can't hear you guys.
That's not good.
Carlos, Mr.
Well,
Chairman, Shayla's trying to
I'm gonna leave and
contact.
come back in.
Okay.
Hello?
Hey,
Hey, can I just leave and come back in right quick?
Yes.
why don't you try to call?
All right.
We'll send
Send me the, all right, send me the phone.
Yeah, it's gonna be on your appointment.
I'm gonna call in.
We can hear you now, Carlos.
I don't think the problem is us hearing him, it's him hearing us.
Right.
To Zoom, enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
Technology is great until it's not.
And it's pretty bad when I'm tech support.
Go back to sleep.
Alan, I think it's about time you get a haircut, don't you think?
I had a lot of hairs I need to get rid of.
Hello, I can hear you now.
Yes.
I can hear you
All right.
too.
All right.
Okay.
So my questions are just my observations. They're not really so much zoning related as they are drainage and maintenance long-term related. As you may know or may not know, there's a bunch of different segments of subdivisions in that neighborhood, and there's a bunch of different retention ponds in there. And having the HOAs and the different units have and acknowledge the appropriate responsibility for maintaining those retention ponds has been somewhat challenging over the years to try to get them to acknowledge it, because this is the way the subdivisions were built in their subsequent phases, and the covenants aren't necessarily one neighborhood, one unit might be responsible for this pond and the next unit's not responsible for it. So just, I would say, as you go forward with whatever happens here, I think you might have to think about this, looking at it as little smaller subdivisions that might be responsible for their own drainage improvements or drainage structures. And kind of the way the lay of the land is, the way you're immediately adjacent to a wetland tributary there, is that you are going to have, it looks like, multiple retention areas to be able to deal with just the lay of the land, the way all of that hillside's kind of coming down to that wetland area. So I just kind of wanted to caution the engineers he's going forward and his developer to be aware that they're going to need to put potentially some very strong covenants in place, and there's going to have to be a lot of probably work in coordination with my office and with the Build Mobile office to coordinate and make sure that the maintenance responsibility of those ponds is captured appropriately, and that subsequent lot buyers, home builders are aware of who maintains what.
Yeah, Nick, I think that's a good point you brought up. I would say that the city's position now, that your subdivision regulations and your stormwater regulations are a lot more strict than they used to be. And that the teeth in them for these HOAs and how they're managing that, and the entity that's got to carry that forward is, you've got a lot more control on that than you may have had even 5 years ago. So it's our intent to develop that and to work with your staff to come up with a document that's acceptable to all parties. So I don't see that being an issue.
Yeah. The tough part is, and when I look at what's proposed here, it almost looks like it's an extension of the existing subdivision, which to some degree it is, but different phases with different covenants, different responsibilities, different drainage stuff. And so you know, as these new lots being built to a more stringent, more modern standard, they have to be isolated in some way from the drainage systems and the maintenance responsibility that comes with the ponds that'll accompany. And just as a quick look, you know, just because I know how the topography is going to fall, I see you're going to end up with at least 4 different ponds. You know, maybe you can get away with 3 there, but it is going to be kind of distinct geographic areas that are isolated, and you may have to consider treating it like it's you know, its own little subdivision within a subdivision, kind of. Yeah, from
Treating the phases independently is what you're kind of thinking. Treating the phases, the maintenance of the phases.
Yeah, and that's just the existing phases. Beth, I think, can attest to that. Within those neighborhoods, it's not clear and it's messy, and those subdivisions were probably built at about the time those subdivision requirements that require the retention ponds were coming online. And at the end of the day, it's just messy when you get into these ponds. The ponds have got 20 or 30 years of life to them. They need to be maintained, and who is responsible for maintaining them? And almost in every situation, it is the homeowners association responsibility. What you're proposing here is just a little more complicated because you are proposing to tie it to a street network of existing subdivisions, existing phases that may or may not have their own retention structures. Some of the units in there I don't think are tied to a retention pond, where some are. And so, of course, anything new would be required to be tied to one. But as you're thinking about the drainage system for these, you really need to think about probably trying to isolate those from any of the drainage systems that are coming down the hillside from those other units that have been previously developed.
Yes, sir. We'll certainly take that into account. I understand your comment and concern.
I have some questions or comments. That's okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Jenright for coming out to a community meeting. We had very good attendance. Everyone was socially distancing, but it was a really good opportunity. Some of you that were at the last Planning Commission meeting, this was an agenda item and they were kind enough to hold it up till this date. I still got a lot of phone calls afterwards. It's not the R1 or the so-called down zoning. It's the egress and ingress and the abutting to current subdivisions. That's really the issue at hand, and people not knowing what to expect. So if we were to look at minimum standards, you could get a lot more than 124 homes in there. The proposal, it's kind of interesting because the staff's recommendation mentions about a subdivision or assumed to be subdivision, making sense for the rezoning. But it's my contention that the plans for the rezoning should be hand in hand with this rezoning application. And Mr. Jenright, if I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you said that you were interested in getting the rezoning first. Is that correct? That the applicant wanted the rezoning of the property?
Well, I mean, I think the rezoning in this situation is really just a housekeeping effort to clean up what's allowed in there. The city staff, when we met with them as the project moves forward, that would be the idea is just to get this property under one uniform zoning. It just makes it a cleaner project instead of
right.
one split here and there.
Right. And did you get the sense that I did? Because if you didn't get it, I certainly, again, don't want to put ideas into your head, but that the people present were okay with the application being a single family residential development instead of business coming through their neighborhood, although I don't think we would allow that, or an R2, which is a lot of the property, which would be much more dense on the area. So it really isn't the rezoning, but it's the plans, and especially in the neighborhood that's above this called Asheville. I think those residents were well represented at the meeting. The smaller neighborhood that this actually can come in off of Cottage Hill. And I did try to get with the traffic engineer Ms. White about meeting with residents, but she wants to see a plan. And I certainly understand that. It's hard to sit with residents if she doesn't know what, she can recommend or what will work for getting this egress and ingress, because some of it is in Carriage Hills, which is massive and already is a traffic problem. And then this other subdivision, which is an independent, isolated subdivision, one way in and out now, looking at a neighborhood that would come in and out of their entry point. And that's very disconcerting to them. And I can appreciate that. But they don't know what can be done or what's to be expected. So it just would be nice if everything was tied together and the traffic plan, the management of it was understood, what the city could or couldn't do to help residents, either some kind of management on Cottage Hill, a stacking lane. I don't know. I'm not the traffic engineer, but it's getting all those commentaries from those hundreds of residents that are used to a certain quality of life, and then additional abutting and how it's going to affect their property. And that's what a rezoning is all about. So I was just hoping there was a way to tie everything together and not do this in piecemeal. So that's, I want to work with the residents and people that are in there and make sure that there is things in place, but how do we do that unless it's a rezoning application and they truly have a seat at the table? Because subdivision is something that is not normally a purview of nearby residents. It is, but something this large obviously will be, but it seems like the whole application should stay together, the rezoning and the subdivision, as that is the reason for rezoning, is to eventually get this subdivision of the
Ms. Bass, just for the
property.
record, are you asking for the zoning and the subdivision application to be submitted at the same time?
Yes, I think that's fair. I think it's fair when people are going to see the change and see egress and ingress and known traffic, known drainage problems, which you heard from the civil engineer. And some of that has to do with that Carriage Hills, their covenants don't talk about maintaining the drainage. The city has spent a lot of money maintaining, and I don't know whether the developers back in the 70s when it was built was platted out, got the city to take it over. It's very confusing, and it's very sensitive area of town with the watershed. It's massive. And so again, I think it's best to have everything tied together. I think it's a fair shot to ask for that so that people are educated and know what to expect and how they can go about making it work, so to speak. And for everybody's best interest, not just the developers, but everybody's as much as possible. And this doesn't allow it.
I tend to agree with what you're saying, and because it is a very complex project that you're tying into a fairly large development. And technically, it's not tying into, but practically it is tying into some older subdivisions. Some of the concerns that Nick had about drainage, that's something that needs to be looked at. Who's going to be responsible for retention in the ponds and maintenance and so forth? To me, it does make sense, and there was quite a bit of concern expressed through email in different ways from the residents of the neighborhood that I think we need to really factor in and take into consideration before we make a project, take on a project so big. I'm glad to hear that there was a meeting with the community to address those things, but I tend to agree that it needs to be presented at one time so we can have all the facts, and so we don't end up coming back later and trying to solve problems that we're creating by doing it piecemeal.
I thank you. I agree, and I appreciate that. And again, I can't speak for everybody in there, but the down zoning was not the issue as much as what is this going to do? How's it going to work? And that would be true regardless of the zoning classification. But it's not going to come on as a PUD. I don't understand. At least that's what I was told. The only other application would be a subdivision of the property. And again, once it's rezoned, if it's 9,600 in a proposed plan, we don't know what it could be by right. And again, that's seeing that layout that helps people understand, and the city to work towards making sure it's, the as best as can be for everybody involved.
I know there was some talk about us hopefully being able to meet back in person sometime in July. This would seemingly be the application that would be better served if we were able to deal with something on this scale in person. So to me, the logical, reasonable path to take would be to put it off until maybe our first meeting in July, to allow us to be in person and have the residents be present to address their concerns, to make sure we're not creating some problems that we don't need to create.
I have a slightly different observation than that I wanted to share with the commission. By them effectively making or requesting all the zoning to be R1, isn't that, even if a subdivision never got built, wouldn't that be better for the single family residential houses around there? Because as it is today, a lot of that is R2 connected to integral streets where they could come in and do something totally different. So, to me, if I were a resident in there, I would want that zoning to be, I would want the R1, because then that gives me more protections. If somebody wanted to come back in, they would have to come back in and change the zoning again. So, my observation of it is taking the zoning separately, in some ways is good. He's coming to the commission twice, to bring his plan together to us rather than just once. And so, the good thing about him coming now, he's gotten to hear some of the concerns about the drainage and the covenants and all that and other concerns. But to me, if you're a resident in there and you're concerned about, things adjacent to you, the best thing you can have is R1. Where right now there is some R2. So, from that perspective, I don't have an objection to hearing the zoning now and separating the two, because he's going to have to come back. The applicant's going to have to come back before the commission regardless. And I think some of the comments he's gotten out of here today might help him when he does bring the subdivision forward to have a better holistic perspective of, what it's going to take to make it happen. But the zoning to me would be better if it was all R1 right now.
Can I ask this question of the staff, if that's okay? Is this considered a landlocked parcel unless they can come in and out of the known subdivisions?
No, you have five street frontages.
You have 5 street frontages. Okay. And they're going to use 3 of them for this right now?
Well, right now, while that is their preliminary plan, that is not even up for the Planning Commission's consideration. Going back to what Nick was saying, with this rezoning, you would have all of this R1. And then before anything, even if for whatever reason they decided to build just one house on this overall piece of property, that would still have to come back before the commission. While we know the intent is to develop single family homes, to do that, they're still looking at coming before the commission with a subdivision based on the number of lots. They would then more than likely have to submit a traffic study for traffic engineering to evaluate. But right now, the proposal strictly would take this overall boundary and make it single family residential.
Well, I think the traffic study is important for the rezoning, and I would like this to have a plan that went with it. And again, you're talking about 2 established neighborhoods, one with already a traffic problem, and one that, like I said, was completely self-contained and does not have through traffic coming in. We know through traffic is problematic in neighborhoods. So I just, want to promote seeing this done as one application. I think I understand the downzoning aspect of it, but at the same time, it's still, it should be something that has more meat to it if you're going to change the zoning. And that's what the applicant would want to do. I can't assure him that there aren't people that don't want the R1, but that was not the issue. The issue was knowing exactly what was to be expected and how the city would handle the traffic changes in their neighborhoods. And so in order to rezone, it gives them a seat at the table. And I think that's important to do for residents that are invested in our city and care about their, value of their properties. So I just lean towards that. I don't think that's surprising anybody. So I would recommend and would like that. And, certainly the applicant can do, and the staff, is promoting that it be separate. So, I'm just going to put it out there where I'm coming from and what the residents, are thinking about and how it can be done extremely well for everybody involved as much as possible.
Margaret, could I get you to address a couple of questions on the process?
Yes, sir.
Okay, zoning, I mean, we're going to make, if we vote on this today, we're going to make the recommendation. The city council will take it up for the final approval of the zoning, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if we approve this zoning to R1, which obviously that's the best and most appropriate zoning classification for this area, I agree with Nick on that. I think Ms. Beth said the same thing. But if the biggest concern that I have is the impact on the adjoining neighborhoods in the areas of traffic, and then also of drainage and water retention, and who's going to be responsible for those for the retention pond maintenance and all the common areas in those neighborhoods. I mean, if those things can be taken care of in the subdivision process, then that's okay. And I'm just wondering, though, if we do the zoning approval today, we take care of those issues in the subdivision application, which would come back later, preferably when we'll all be in person and the residents and neighbors can be there at the meeting. When would the city council be taking up the zoning change to actually make it final change to R1?
The earliest I could, the city council, let me start over again, I apologize. We do not forward the rezoning application for council consideration until we receive the legal advertisement fee. The earliest I could see that being submitted would be next week. And then that would put it before the city council for a call, roughly 10 to 14 days from a week from Tuesday. And then the public hearing would be 4 weeks later. So I guess to answer your question, the earliest it could be before the city council for consideration and public hearing would be 6 weeks roughly.
Okay, so we would more than likely be voting on the subdivision prior to city council making the final approval on the zoning.
That is something I'm going to have to defer to the engineer on, because I'm not sure where they are in their design process. The Planning Commission's deadline for the July 16th meeting is probably next week. So otherwise, he's probably looking at August before having his plan before the commission for his subdivision.
Margaret, in the in the hypothetical that the zoning did pass today and went through its process, and then the applicant never came back for a subdivision, the way the maps that I'm looking at, it looks like there's 3 individual parcels of land. Is that correct?
You're talking about this?
Yeah, if it were all just rezoned, I guess the question would be how many single family houses could be built on it by the number of lots. And I'm trying to show to
more than likely, Nick, none, because I don't believe any of those are a legal lot of record.
Right.
So at the end of the day, you could have all of this property rezoned to R1, but the Planning Commission's still going to have to review and approve a subdivision application, regardless of whether it's for 1 lot or 92 lots.
And even in the hypothetical that they were already legal lots of record, the individual parcels that would define how many houses could be built. So if it's 3 or 4 parcels, the most that could be built there would be 3 or 4 houses without.
Correct.
So the point is the density is almost zero, as close to zero as it can get without them coming back. And to me, I mean, again, what protects the residents' entrance the most is down zoning that the zone, downgrading the zoning. Because today somebody could come in and arguably do the R2, I mean, you get the R2 and the, I'm guessing that's B1 up in that one corner.
Yes.
They could do it almost by right if they're legal lots of record.
Well, and that was kind of what I was thinking about as listening to everybody's discussion. I'm certainly understanding of the residents' concerns, and I know that all of those issues with the stormwater and the ingress and egress will all be addressed when they actually go through a subdivision and creating legal lots of record. So I think it's really in the best interest of the community if we all agree that resident R1 is the proper zoning for this, that we go ahead and move forward with that on to today. Now, I will say if this was to zone to something else, R3, or then I would definitely want to see the plans attached to the zoning. But I think in this case, personally, I'm sympathetic with all the discussion and the points being made, but I feel it's in the neighborhood's best interest to go ahead and move forward with the zoning today.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that as well, as long as we could address those areas of concern through the subdivision process and that application. And considering the timeline about, for the zoning and going for the city council, then I'm totally fine with approving the zoning change today and then dealing with all these other issues on the subdivision application.
I would also like to lift up that if it was packaged together as one application, then the client or the owner has incurred fees to not get the zoning. So if they're not going to get the zoning changed, then it kind of kills the project. And so I would rather they have the ability to at least know they got the zoning changed before they dealt with the other issues that they're going to have to come before us about anyway. And so rather than it coming through as one package where they kind of incurred expenses to do a full development package to come before us, not to get it rejected by the on the city council side for the zoning, especially considering that R1 would be in the best interest of the current residents there anyway.
I agree.
The city council doesn't do subdivisions. That doesn't come up to the council. Only the planning approvals or PUDs and or zoning or rezonings. They don't. We don't hear. So
I make a motion to approve.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Roll call vote. Myself, I vote yes. Ms. Latham?
Yes.
Ms. Rich?
no.
Mr. Hembry?
Yes to the zoning.
Mr. Umberger?
Yes.
Ms. Denson?
Yes.
Mr. Cameron?
Yes.
Ms. Sessions?
Yes.
Mr. Stubbs?
Yeah.
Did I lose?
Mr. Atchison indicated that his phone was dying, that he might fall off the call, so he may not be with us anymore.
Okay. We had enough applicant passes, zoning application is approved by those voting. Moving to item number 3, Partridge Wood subdivision, 1001 Bristol Court recommended for tentative approval. Any discussion from staff?
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to bring the commission's attention to the comments submitted by Ms. Geneva Spencer Gales. She is concerned about she has property adjoining this, and she is landlocked, and she was looking for access. However, there are no new streets proposed as a part of this application, and it is an existing condition. Staff recommends that, the application be approved as outlined in the staff recommendation.
Is the applicant agreeable to all the conditions?
I just let him in, Mr. Byrd. Hold on, I may have him muted. No? Jerry, are you here? Mr. Chairman, we had contacted him. He had asked to attend the meeting. I believe his attendance was more so that he could address the commission if they had any questions. Bert, please confirm. However, he did not have any objection to the staff recommendation.
Okay. Any questions or comments from commissioners?
I move to approve based on staff recommendations.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Roll call, Ms. Latham,
Yes.
Ms. Rich,
Yes.
Mr. Hembry,
Yes.
Mr. Umberger,
Yes.
Ms. Denson,
Yes.
Mr. Cameron,
Yes.
Ms. Sessions,
Yes.
Mr. Stubbs,
Yes.
and myself, yes. Item passes. New planning approval applications. Item number 4, 3170 Dolphin Street, Branch Towers, recommended for tentative approval. Staff, any staff comments?
No, sir. The applicant has been admitted into the meeting. He's available if the commission has any questions. However, he was not opposed to any of the recommendations. This also received the needed variance from the Board of Zoning Adjustment at their meeting on Monday.
Was there any opposition from the community?
No, sir, we had no opposition, and we had no comments uploaded to the portal.
The only other question I have is, I know recently we approved a tower site location on the other side of Dolphin Street on Midmost, I believe it was. Is this the Midtown? Yes, I'm sorry. Is this the meet the required distance that the city ordinance requires from that other tower?
That site was appealed to the city council, who granted the appeal, thus denying the planning approval. This is one of the alternative sites that was discussed. And so this is compliant with the distance requirements.
Okay, so this is the replacement location for what was originally proposed across Dolphin Street.
Correct, yes, sir.
Okay. I move to approve based on staff recommendations.
Second.
We have to have finding of facts, I believe.
That's correct.
Yes, I have those indicated. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. findings of facts A, B, and C.
Okay. Properly moved and seconded. Any further discussion? A roll call vote. Ms. Latham,
Yes.
Ms. Rich,
Yes.
Mr. Armberger,
Yes.
Ms. Denson,
Yeah.
Mr. Cameron,
Yes.
Ms. Sessions,
Yes.
Mr. Stubbs,
Yes.
I believe that's everyone and myself, yes. Item passes. That was the last item on our agenda. On our other business, Unified Development Code update.
If we could, we just want to take a little bit more of your time to give you a briefing on the draft 3 of the Unified Development Code. We've got a PowerPoint presentation that kind of walks you through where we are in this process. So if you can stick around with us for a little while longer, we'll give you that update, hopefully answer any questions that you may have. And then we will adjourn the meeting after this presentation concludes. Yeah. If I could, I'd like to show just a quick video that we have prepared. We've been having multiple stakeholder meetings over the last several weeks. May 28th launched the commencement of the draft 3 informal public outreach stage. And so a lot of education is going on along with that process. So this was a video that was prepared as an outreach tool for our citizens.
Mobile is taking our vision to action.
In November 2015, our city adopted Map for Mobile, a new citywide plan for preservation, revitalization, and growth. Map for Mobile is a long-term vision that provides principles and goals to guide future planning, regulations, and decisions. It also contains dozens of specific action items.
The Map for Mobile contains our ideas as a community. In the past, I was invited to community meetings so that we could sit down, begin to decide what were our visions for our city.
Well, I think everyone has been engaged and that everyone in the community had a chance to weigh in and say their ideas for the community.
It was definitely interesting to see the large number of people that came out and were very interested in what was going on and being involved in the process.
Our citizens had clear priorities during the Map for Mobile process. They wanted better design in new development, better protection of our natural resources, a more walkable city, preservation of our historic neighborhoods, and a streamlined permitting process.
I think this plan is a huge step, and I think it's going to require us to be intentional in our future design and in the future building of the infrastructure, so that we are putting in place the building blocks that we need to ensure that walkability, bikeability, increased transportation, increased access to various resources in the community and amenities is just a part of how we're designed.
That he wanted to make the city so that we could have our children want to come back.
Having plans like this makes it better for the people living here, as well as it's good for the economic development of the region, because it's where people are going to want to come and live.
And I think people will be happy to know that their input meant something, because a lot of times, and I think a lot of people at the time said, well, okay, so what's going to become of this? Because I probably was one of those people too that said, okay, so we've given our input, what's going to happen?
For over 3 years, the city and its partners have been working hard to bring Map for Mobile to reality.
But I think we've seen a number of things in our community. We've seen a number of things happen. And, you know, the streets are, for the most part, the streets are better. It was mentioned earlier that, you know, there's sidewalks in this community where there've never been sidewalks before.
I think there's a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of discussion and talk between partners that maybe didn't talk as much in the past. I know definitely from a health perspective, we have meetings with developers, we have meetings with the city, all focusing on trying to see how we can build health into the community and really design smart for the future.
I've seen a lot of changes in the past 3 years, especially the downtown area, and I wish they would hurry up and come into my neighborhood.
It's a vision. It's a vision for long term. It talks about zoning and future planning. It talks about expansion and inviting others in to be a part of our great city.
There's got to be a leader that's going to push things forward. And in sports, you have to have a leader, a coach, that makes sure that they're winning. And hopefully everyone will see that the whole community is winning by ensuring that this Map for Mobile is engaged.
Map for Mobile is not just another plan on a shelf. It's your vision. The city is turning that vision into action.
That's why I support.
I support.
I support.
I support the Map for Mobile. Mobile.
Okay. Well, thank y'all for indulging us for a few seconds. We're doing a series of educational campaigns with all stakeholder groups, and I think it kind of helps them to see how this process was initiated back in 2015 with the Map for Mobile Comprehensive Plan, and how we've evolved to a full rewrite of our zoning code, and being very intentional about communicating this message to the public, but working to be sure that we're getting feedback every step of the way. So with that, we'll zero in right now on the Unified Development Code. I'll walk you through the timeline where we are now. I will turn it over to Margaret to walk you through the particulars of the most critical changes with respect to the UDC right now, and would love to answer any questions that you all might have. So you all are well aware that our zoning ordinance is dated. It's old. It's been piecemealed, updates over the last 50+ years. So we're tackling a wholesale rewrite of that ordinance, and the Map for Mobile Comprehensive Plan serves as the impetus for this work. I think you all know well what the purpose of zoning is, and the standards and procedures that we use to address development or redevelopment within our community. But the second bullet, I think, is where we're focusing a lot of attention, and that's making sure that we're working to strengthen our neighborhoods, remain economically competitive, but at the end of the day, creating a great place for Mobilians to grow and raise their families. So throughout this process, we've heard from citizens from all over Mobile, in the neighborhood groups. I think we created an environment where people could communicate their concerns and their priorities. So from the neighborhood side, we frequently heard that you're allowing anything to be built anywhere, and what can we do to stop that, because you're ruining our neighborhood. But then on the flip side of that, I think we heard from the development community that it's so hard to develop in this town, and you're going to destroy our businesses. So we're working very hard to strike a balance, making sure that we're protecting our neighborhoods, but creating an environment that remains economically stable and viable. And I think we all know right now through some very trying and difficult times. So over a year ago, we ran across this article that the National Association of Realtors put together in 2019. It really spoke to the value of zoning and how it can be used as a tool to enhance and grow your community. And it really spoke to this notion of smart growth and ways to incorporate, best practices that hopefully create a sense of place while at the same time enhancing your property values in your community. The article goes on to talk about the importance of form-based codes. And so I think most of you are aware that our UDC is a hybrid. It incorporates some form-based codes components into it by addressing architectural and site design elements. But as we've studied and researched the cities that are utilizing this as a tool, it's reaping great dividends for their long-term development. And so again, this affirms, our decision to to incorporate similar standards into the UDC. So again, we've had multiple stakeholder communities just this week. I think we're on our maybe number 5 or number 6, but we've been reaching out to the development community, the business community. We've reached out to our neighborhood groups. We had our first virtual community live stream yesterday. And so, you know, now that our community engagement has changed, we're being very thoughtful about how we communicate, but we're really trying and working hard to make sure we're incorporating a lot of people and a lot of different viewpoints and thoughts into our work. So these are just a few of the folks that have signed on and given us a vote of confidence and support the map for Mobile. So again, you know that this planning commission voted for and approved the map for Mobile comprehensive plan back in 2015. During those stages, we had over 500 citizens participate in workshops that gave us a clear understanding of what Mobile Union's priorities are for growth and development. Shortly after that, we updated the future land use and major street plans, which really served as an impetus for the full rewrite of the code. We are on our 3rd iteration. In March, we actually opened up the portal for comments and uploaded all of the articles onto the website. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 crisis came upon us and we had to address our timeline. But since I believe it was the 2nd week in March, all of this information has been on the Map for Mobile UDC website, and we've been trying to encourage and drive folks to look at the summary documents so they can learn about what we've done so far. Again, we've convened over 75 small groups under the version 2 push. We had over 1,000 comments, and so folks have asked, it's really taken you all a long time to get to the steps. Well, we've really worked hard to process, rationalize, and understand the comments that we received during that period. More than 600 of those comments were specific to the mapping, specific to the proposed mapping recommendations that were outlined in draft 2. The balance or remaining 400 comments were very specific to the articles, the language that was outlined in the document. So it has taken us roughly a year to process that information and to come out with I believe, a much more improved document. It's been completely reorganized, completely overhauled in that the comments that we received, I believe, helped us to understand directionally where we needed to move from that point. So again, May 28th launched the 30-day comment period. So we will, at the end of June 28th, that comment period will end. We've worked really hard last week and this week, reach out to all of the groups that we know so that they will have ample time to comment during this stage. And we're encouraging them to go to the mapformobile.org website to register their comments with us after having reviewed draft version 3. So what happens after this 30-day review? Staff will take the time to process the comments that we've received. We will revise and put forth draft version 4. That will be advertised, but once that advertising process is complete, we will come to the Planning Commission requesting that we start the formal public review process. So everything we've done up until this point has been informal, nothing prescribed by our state code requirements, but everything that we do with respect to public hearings, advertising, and getting notice out to the public is clearly outlined in the state code, so we'll be following those procedures. So in short, you all, when you're ready, will tell us when we need to move forward with the public hearing, as we will be inviting folks to come and give us formal comment and formal feedback on this draft document. We will be asking for the Planning Commission to give a recommendation, hopefully of support for the UDC. Once we receive that thumbs up of approval, then it will advance to the City Council for adoption. So if They're not, I'd like to take just a half a second to see if there are any questions regarding the timeline, any questions regarding the level of outreach that we've undertaken. It has been slightly altered given the coronavirus circumstances. But so far, I think Mobilians are resilient and they've turned with us. And so we've really gotten a lot of positive feedback, at least on our efforts to get the word out. Any questions about that?
Shayla, I have a question.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. How do you envision the public hearings? Is it going to be in through, I'm not sure I understand. It's like the whole document is heard and taken public comment? Or are you splitting it up or looking at different aspects of the UDC? Do you have any idea?
The plan at this stage is to take the entire document and to present that to the planning commission in whole, and ask that a public hearing be scheduled for the entire document. It's not our intention to bring it to you in parts.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't know whether it would come up in parts, so no, but it's like, so if somebody wanted to talk about the new landscaping codes, they would just have to have read it and then they would focus in for their comments on that particular aspect. I'm just being hypothetical. Is that what you anticipate? I'm just trying to think. People have different interests.
Ms. Rich, if I may,
Sure.
I'll say that in this informal process that we're in now, where we're taking comments via the portal, Bert will walk you through that and show you how that can be done, so that you can comment on a specific requirement. But then when the document in version 4 is presented to the Planning Commission, you are correct. People are going to have different areas of interest within the document, and they will simply need to present those concerns to the commission.
Okay, thanks.
Now what may be helpful is there is a table of contents, and you can look at that and you can see what each article entails. So if someone's interest or area of concern is natural resource protection, those are in Article 3, and they can see that in that table of contents and then click on Article 3 to go to their pertinent subsection.
Okay, thanks.
There's one document that I did fail to mention. The UDC in its revised form is a little under 300 pages. But we have put together a summary document that highlights at a glance what the most significant changes have been from version 2 to version 3. So I like to call this your cheat sheet. It tells you where to refer to in the current draft, where you can look for a significant change. And if you're interested in knowing how the language has changed from the previous draft, it gives you a reference point and tells you where specifically within an article in which sections to go to find that change. So if you don't have time to read this full document page by page, and you're really interested in what's the difference between 2 and 3, this works to hopefully summarize what some of those key features are that you can look to at a glance.
Is the Planning Commission going to get printed documents instead of working off of the website for this information?
Yes, the City Council and the Planning Commission all received this document. Everyone has one.
When did it come up to council? Do you know?
It came up to council prior to COVID, those 2 weeks. I personally hand delivered every single one of them.
Okay.
For that day.
And what about the document is there going to be a document that's going to have a 3 and 4? Any additional, or you don't anticipate any changes from 3 to 4 for this last, or from 2 to 3 rather?
Well, let me answer the first question. There will likely be changes in the document possibly from 3 to 4. That's why we're still in this stage of gaining or gathering feedback and input. And so there will be a new version 4 that comes out of this process.
Okay. Thank you.
But the articles on the website, I think we still have the draft 2 version as well as the draft 3 version to access on the website. And if you, as a planning commission member, I know Lisa hand delivered all of them, but if you need an additional copy, let me know.
I think
Yeah. And Ms. Richard, if you need another copy, we can get one. But
No, I thought there was a newer one that came out with the.
No. This is the same thing. It's still
Okay,
draft
thank
3.
you. Okay, and we have that smaller document as a summary. Is that part of that in there?
Yeah, it was in the folder.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All of this information can be accessed from the website as well.
Right.
And Bert will show you that in a moment.
So Shayla, I do have a question about the timing. I have a hard time thinking in terms of 30 days and 30 days and 30 days. Do you have a general idea of when it will come to us?
Yeah,
Like
if
projection. I'm not going to hold you to it.
Yeah. Well, assuming that, we have no major local or world issues that interfere with our work. And fortunately, I have to give our team a pat on the back. I mean, we continue to operate through these circumstances and really haven't missed a beat. But what we intend to do is, after the 30-day review process, go back to the bunker, as I like to say, go through all of the comments that we receive. That really kind of dictates our schedule based on the volume of comments. And like I said, last time we received 1,000, so it took a little longer than I had anticipated, as I wasn't expecting that volume, but that was a positive thing for us. But after this 30-day period, we will take the time to go through the comments, and out of that, we'll be making any necessary edits or revisions to inform a draft 4. That draft 4 will be subject to another 30-day review from the public and then be presented to the Planning Commission. So my ballpark time period that I'm looking at is the fall, roughly September, October time period.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, Margaret will walk you through the changes and highlight those that you can expect to see in draft 3.
The first major change that you will notice is that the existing zoning map and zoning district names are retained. As Shayla showed you on one of the previous slides, we received over 600 comments on the zoning map. And there was a lot of confusion associated with new zoning district names. So we have retained our existing zoning district names, and there are no proposed changes to the zoning map as part of draft version 3. However, if you may recall, in draft version 2, we did have some proposed zoning districts that we have retained as options in this current version 3. Those are the commercial warehouse district and the 3 maritime districts, maritime mixed, light, and heavy. I do want to emphasize and clarify, however, that while those zoning districts are retained in draft version 3, they have not been mapped. The map is as it exists right now. The table of uses has been clarified. We have uses that are by right, conditional use, and special exception. Many previous uses in the existing chart of permitted uses that require planning approval are now either a conditional use or a special exception. I'm going to flip to an excerpt from the chart. Conditional use permits are applied to those uses that are considered of citywide impact. For instance, hazardous materials manufacturing. Those are listed as a conditional use in maritime heavy and in I-2. Conditional use permits are a two-step application, with the first step with the Planning Commission, who will strictly make a recommendation, and the final approval with the City Council. Other uses are allowed by special exception. Special exception are those uses that are of neighborhood impact. For instance, an RV park or a bed and breakfast in an R3 area. Special exception is set out in state law and would be in this ordinance a one-step public hearing with that application going to the Board of Zoning Adjustment. Other uses then, of course, are uses that are allowed by right with no public hearing required. Another major change from version 2 to version 3 are the form-based standards. In version 2, those standards were very prescriptive. Based on your zoning designation, you had a specific set of building criteria that you had to incorporate into your development. And then there were a lot of elements for the building that you could not incorporate into your development. We have modified those criteria, and I will get to a slide on that in a moment. The other thing we have retained is the suburban and urban sub-districts in residential and commercial classification. So the form-based standards, as Shayla said earlier, this is a hybrid code. And in order to protect neighborhoods, we are retaining design requirements to improve the quality of development and to also reflect the existing development patterns of the neighborhood. Again, in an effort to protect the surrounding investment of the neighborhood. We are, however, incorporating flexible standards to allow many options for compliance, which again can help spur development. Additionally, when a compliant plan is submitted and the use is allowed by right, no public hearings would be required. So here's the menu. In draft version 2, you have all of these different site development standards, your site frontage type, your height, your wall, and your architectural features. In draft version 2, it was very prescriptive. You could only have a sidewalk frontage type development in certain zoning districts. However, in draft version 3, what is proposed are options. You have to have one element of each of these classifications incorporated into the site. You can even incorporate more than one element. Again, assigning and requiring standards, but providing the option of flexibility for compliance. These are just examples of your site frontage standards. Again, you would pick one of those. In your building form, you would pick one of these. Your building wall, You would have some type of articulation, a notch, offset, or projection. And then on your architectural features, you would pick at least one of the following. Again, allowing flexibility. Now, these are 4 different examples within the city in terms of the actual building itself that would comply with the proposed building standards of the UDC. As I talked about earlier, we are also retaining the urban and suburban sub-districts. The orange area are your urban areas, and then the green areas are your suburban areas. Those set forth some of your site development standards, such as your setbacks, your site coverage, and your landscaping requirements. Criteria that went into developing the urban suburban dichotomy included: is the area in a nationally or locally recognized historic district? Was it located near a streetcar line? Was it developed prior to 1950? So looking at areas to make sure we're mapping them correctly for the kind of development in the neighborhood. And then this is just an example of the difference between the urban and the suburban site development criteria. In an urban environment, you could build up close to the street, but you couldn't build any further back than 45 feet. In a suburban area, you're not up close to the street. You have your minimum setbacks, which are typical of your suburban development. Another major change is that neighborhood overlay districts have been moved from the appendices to individual articles, and that the standards of these overlay districts are now mandatory. This includes the Village of Spring Hill, Africatown, the Peninsula overlays, as well as the Historic Districts overlay. These overlay districts that I've mentioned were previously established and resulted from city adopted plans. And then future neighborhood districts could be established through a neighborhood planning process. That is outlined in the neighborhood planning toolkit, which helps to organize for a neighborhood to be able to present their plan for consideration and adoption, utilizing the elements of the toolkit. Another change is that tree protection and preservation requirements and the authority of the Mobile Tree Commission have been removed from the Unified Development Code and will be their own separate chapter of the city code. Again, just to emphasize, these are tree protection and preservation regulations that are moving. Landscaping and tree plantings are still part of draft version 3. Definitions. We had several comments on definitions or defined terms. Depending on where you're located, a balcony may be defined in the UDC in one manner, in the Village of Spring Hill in a different manner, and then in the Downtown Development District in yet another manner. We went through all of the definitions so that regardless of where you're located, all the defined terms are in sync. As Shayla mentioned earlier, article names have changed and the elements within those articles have changed. The only article that didn't change in terms of the name is Article 2, the zoning districts. However, from 2 forward, everything else has been redone. Article 3 are development standards, and those include things such as your natural resource protection and landscaping. Use regulations, those are uses that have additional criteria such as the telecommunications ordinance. Article 5 are procedures, how you go through your rezoning, your conditional use, and so forth. Again, drawing your attention to the neighborhood plans, which are now articles. The Downtown Development District Code, however, is still an appendix because it is truly its own separate zoning code. It doesn't even have the same zoning designations as exist in Article 2. Does anyone at this point have any questions? Okay.
Margaret, I have a quick question. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The area joining the river there by the convention center, what category is that area covered in? Wasn't that cut out into a special zone, special district?
You know, without actually going to the map, I cannot recall if that is under the UDC or the DDD. Bert?
I'll have to look at the map as well. I know that a portion of the waterfront is under the DDD, but then most of it is under our standard code.
And that
Just
would
seemed like,
not change.
it seemed like I remember there was a small section there that we had classified under a different category, different district in the initial plan.
Well, in the initial proposed revisions of the, for example, with maybe version 1 and version 2, we did perhaps make some changes in that area. But since we are now reverting back to all of the existing zoning districts, no changes are proposed. So I am now looking at the zoning map, and let's see. It is broken up in that the Maritime Museum and Cooper Riverside Park are zoned as part of the Downtown Development District. But then going north for the convention center and going south for the cruise terminal, those are within the standard zone districts.
Okay, all right, so I think that must have been a change. It seemed like I remember we had that as a separate type of district all to itself, but I guess that changed and just falls under the DDD.
If there are no more questions, I'm gonna hand it off to Bert to go over the online interface.
So we have updated our online interface for version 3. It is very similar to what you saw for version 2. We've just put the new information. You have the ability to use an interactive map to look at specific pieces of property to see what the zoning is. If it's in the village of Spring Hill or Africatown, for example, you can get that cheat sheet that Shayla mentioned, which is a summary of all these major changes between version 2 and version 3. You can look at the actual articles themselves and download them. So while you guys have hard copies, there may be people out there who want to download their own copies. And then you can give us feedback regarding whether you have concerns about specific locations on a map or the articles themselves. So the online map is a much briefer version of what we had provided for version 2. So you can use this online map to again look at existing zoning districts, to find a specific piece of property to see how it's zoned, and how it's zoned today should be how it will be zoned once this new code is adopted, unless there's some change in zoning between that period. You can also look for the neighborhood overlays, so you can see where the peninsula boundary is, the Africa Town boundary, or the Village of Spring Hill boundary. As Margaret showed, you can see where your urban and suburban districts are located. So you can zoom in on a piece of property and see that something in Midtown is probably urban, and something out in West Mobile is probably in the suburban district. And then finally, we are proposing a few changes to our currently adopted future land use map. We had a lot of feedback regarding the parks and open space designation on privately owned property. And so we are proposing revisions that include removing any parks and open space designation on private property and putting those properties in other categories. So this is an example of the interactive map, and zooming in and clicking on a property. It gives you the existing zoning district, which will not change. It tells you if it's in an overlay district. In this case, it is not. It tells you what the proposed zoning subdistrict is. In this case, it's urban. Below that, you have your current adopted future land use category, which in this case is mixed density residential. And we are proposing to change that to low density residential, because that is what actually is more applicable in this area. And finally, in this pop-up box in the middle, you have the ability to click on the blue text to take you to a comment form, so you can comment on this specific piece of property and any concerns you may have. The other ways to get feedback, in addition to commenting on a mapped location, which is your option 1, you have option 2, where you can comment on the actual article. So as Ms. Rich had mentioned, if someone wanted to comment on the tree and landscape proposals, you would select article 3, I believe, put in your topic, and provide us with all the comments that you have regarding those articles or those issues. And then you can also send in your comments by mail to the attention of Shayla Biko, or you can drop off your comments here at Government Plaza. So any questions regarding the online interface?
So if there are no questions, just to remind, as far as the next steps in the process, we will wrap up the 30-day public review period on June 28th. We will close the information communication portal for comment and feedback at that time. We will take time as a staff to go through the feedback that we've received, make any necessary edits or changes. But then we will be coming to the Planning Commission as a next step in that process. And then at that point, we would be looking for guidance and direction from the commission as to how you would like to move forward with the public hearing process, having any associated business meetings for discussion, just some general guidance as to how you'd like to handle it as a next step. Once we have received the Planning Commission's recommendation of support, again, we would move forward to the City Council, and any associated public hearings and direction from the council would take place at that stage.
Ayla, I think you have said this already, but I'm sorry I missed it. What is the time frame for all of this? I know we have 30 days for the version 3 and then 30 for the 4, but what do you anticipate the adoption and public hearings process will be?
Well, we're projecting a date in September to present it to the commission. And so kind of after that, it's a little hard for me to nail down like an adoption date. Truly, as a commission, you know, you'll need to give staff direction and guidance as to, I mean, it could be one public hearing, it could be 2 public hearings. We have a prescribed standard that we have to follow as far as advertising. So we would really like to make sure that, at least from your perspective, that we get this right, because any tweak or change once it's presented to the planning commission, would be subject to additional advertising if any changes to the document were made.
No, no.
Go ahead.
Once we have to advertise the public hearing with the planning commission, and by state law, that's one public hearing. That's the minimum. But we simply have to have the document publicly available.
Okay.
When it goes to the city council, then we would have to work with city legal regarding the advertisement of the ordinance as being presented to the city council.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. So again, at this stage, the target date for us to present to the planning commission would be at a meeting date in September. And so it would start with a call for a public hearing, then a public hearing date would be set, and then we've got to work and weave into our timeline the necessary advertising dates to ensure that the public is given proper notice and has the opportunity to participate in a public hearing. So.
You're on the home run stretch.
We're getting there.
Long time coming.
Yeah, just when you think you have a timeline in your mind, they're
Great work.
I appreciate your support. If you have any questions and you've got something that comes to mind outside of our meeting today, I'm happy to sit down and work with the team to meet to clarify or get your feedback. That would be very helpful to us.
Thank you, Shayla.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, that concludes our presentation for this afternoon.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate that information very much and for the progress you and your team has made. Is there anything else from commissioners? Our meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos.